Taking the West diplomacy forward to ease the Ukraine conflict and fears of a Russian invasion, French President Emmanuel Macron held talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow that lasted for more than 5 hours. Sitting across a long table from Putin at the Kremlin, Macron said that the discussion was a start towards de-escalation. The French president also said that he had made concrete proposals to address the concerns of both Russia and the West.
I think today's discussion can start to show the direction of where we need to go in a de-escalation, the terms of which we already know.
Une désescalade dont nous connaissons d'ailleurs les termes. Je me réjouis d'avoir l'opportunité de pouvoir.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to get into all these issues in detail and start building together a useful response for Russia and the rest of Europe.
Utile, collectivement, pour la Russie.
A useful response is, of course, one that allows war to be avoided and build confidence, stability and visibility for everyone.
De construire des éléments de confiance.
The French presidency said that the proposals include an undertaking from both sides not to take any new military action and launching a new strategic dialogue to revive peace process in Kiev's conflict with Moscow, backed separatists especially in the country's east. Welcoming Macron as dear Emmanuel, the Russian president hailed efforts by France to resolve the conflict, repeatedly thanking the French leader for coming to Moscow. Putin assured that he was ready for a compromise and said that he would look at proposals put forward by Macron. He, however, continued to blame the West for raising tensions.
I see how much effort the current France leadership and the president personally put to solve the crisis tied to providing equal security in Europe in a serious historic perspective and to solve the issue of Ukraine's internal crisis in the southeast of the country.
The Russian president also repeated warnings about the threat of a war if Ukraine were to join NATO. During the press conference with Macron, Putin said that there would be no winners should the European countries be drawn into a military conflict with Russia if Ukraine joins NATO and tries to retake Crimea. He also urged Ukraine to comply with the Minsk agreements, which aims to end separatist war in Ukraine's east.
Европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией. Конечно, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы также и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. По некоторым компонентам по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет.
From Moscow, the French president has now headed to Kiev, where he will hold talks with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Macron and Putin will hold a phone call after the meeting and the French president's meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart in particular.
Mais par l'intensification de ces dialogues, le fait que nous nous reparlerons dans quelques jours, que nous apprécierons d'ailleurs des nouvelles initiatives à prendre, ensemble et avec toutes les parties prenantes considérées, je suis sûr que nous arriverons à un résultat. Il n'est pas aisé, mais j'en suis sûr.
France is currently heading the European Union, and President Macron, who is facing a re-election challenge in April, has tried to position himself as the key EU figure in the negotiations between Russia and the West. On Sunday, he even held a 40-minute phone call with the US President Joe Biden. Now, for more on this, we are now being joined by our correspondent Julia Chapman from Moscow. Julia, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start by talking about the meeting between President Macron and President Putin, something the world has been closely watching. As we understand, Macron, of course, wants to position himself as a key negotiator. How do the talks stand as of now, especially when it comes to the Ukraine conflict?
After the 5 hours plus of dialogue that was held between President Macron and President Vladimir Putin, they finally came out and gave a press conference which was very short on detail. President Putin said that Emmanuel Macron raised some ideas that could form the basis of future negotiations, and he did say that Russia was trying to find some sort of compromise that would suit everybody, but there was no deal that had been heralded by the French side ahead of these talks. That said, according to the Financial Times newspaper, some French officials are briefing that there was at least steps towards an agreement on military de-escalation, something that President Macron said he wouldn't leave Moscow without. They mentioned promises not to stage any kind of military action. Certainly that hasn't been confirmed by the Kremlin, which says that all the subjects discussed at yesterday's meetings will have to be fed back to France's other allies in the European Union, the United States, that it isn't for France to unilaterally make agreements with the Kremlin, but there did seem to be some sort of positive language emerging from these talks.
Right. Now, as we know, President Macron is headed to Kiev, to Ukraine, to meet with the Ukrainian president. We will, of course, be catching all the updates when the leaders sit together and the outcome of that meeting. And we understand that President Putin is expected to hold a phone call with Macron after that meeting. What can we expect on that front?
That's right. The two presidents did agree to continue dialogue going forward. It's been very intensive between Russia and France in recent weeks as Emmanuel Macron tries to put himself center stage of these diplomatic negotiations. They held 3 phone calls in the 10 days leading up to yesterday's meeting. They've agreed to speak again, as you say, after President Macron travels to Ukraine. It was an interesting dynamic that President Macron came to Moscow first and then to Kiev, while most diplomats have been doing it the other way around, consulting with Kiev, listening to the perspective of Ukrainian officials and then taking their concerns to Moscow. President Macron has a different approach. He has been accused of appeasing the Russian president, of being too conciliatory, but he says that we need to keep talking to Russia, otherwise other nations, other actors will fill the gap, and he believes that dialogue is very important and respect should be shown to Russia.
Right, Julia Chapman, thanks so much for all those inputs and thanks for joining us from Moscow. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.